Welcome to the How to Life podcast by LifeWorks, a modern day advice column for young adults.
Where we answer your questions on how
To
life. Welcome back to another episode. Thank you for submitting your questions and for sticking with us. We appreciate all the support and we hope to continue this awesome series of answering your questions on how to life. Today's question: how to be an adult juggling multiple responsibilities while still making time for self care?
I really appreciate this question because I think it's ever relevant. This is one of those evergreen topics, but also it's very much real for me right now. I think for both of us. When you're embarking on a new journey where you're taking on new projects, new relationships, maybe, considering career changes, you're typically juggling so many different things at once. And that's certainly where I'm at right now. And so, how do you make time for self care? Well, first off, I think it's really important to define self care.
Self care, in my mind, we can define it simply as activities or actions or behaviors that you can engage in that help restore you. I think, in the context of a lot of the conversations around self care, it's a lot of making sure we're at 100% or things that can get us back to 100% when we're feeling depleted, when we're feeling unmotivated or not energized or drained from our work or our relationships or life in general. Self care is something that you do that can help restore you to take care of yourself.
And I think to add to that further is the acts, to me, they're everyday acts that help you not ever get depleted. A consistent routine or, system for your self care in ways that work with your schedule is so crucial.
Thank you for sharing that definition. I think that's important to recognize, and I I believe that there are two definitions of self-care to kind of keep in mind, and one is restorative. Undoubtedly, self-care activities are to help you get back to equilibrium, but there's also this idea that I love that you touched on of implementing a system of self-care that is resiliency. So restoration or restorative self-care and resilient self-care in the form of a system of day-to-day or month-to-month or once a year activities that you engage in that make sure that you're rock solid. So when things come up in your life, they don't deplete you.
Mm.
There also, you can have a toolbox of self care activities that can help restore you when things inevitably come up that do kind of take more out of you than normal. So I think that we've
Mm.
established a really good definition of what self care can look like with those two areas. And so, to go back to the specific question of how to be an adult juggling multiple responsibilities while still making time for self care, what I kind of felt in the tone of the question was somewhat of an anxiety about self care in and of itself. I think the language used in asking the question implies that, along with all the other things, life, work, friendships, family dynamics, hobbies, these are all balls juggling in the air, and self care is just another ball that you're worried about dropping or not incorporating in your juggling act of life. And maybe there's a little bit of feeling shame or feeling inadequate because you're not, in your mind, living up to the self care ideals that maybe you're hearing about or have seen in other people. And that's not something that you should feel. Self care should inherently be something that gives you light, that helps you live a more fulfilling life. And it shouldn't be something that you're so worried about. And so, just wanted to
Mm.
touch on that in the framing of the question, that we hope that as we offer these examples of self-care and things that you can do to implement it in your life, that it doesn't cause you anxiety, that it's only something that can help you.
Thank you for that reminder. I think we've all been there before where, especially if you're a high achiever like us, sometimes you can even stress about, hey, am I self caring to a good enough standard? Which, if you take a step back, that's so silly. So I think us having sort of those two different definitions of self care, we can start to address what that looks like and what that implementation looks like. And before we dive into those, I think it's also important to remind ourselves that our schedules and our energy levels fluctuate. And anything that we design is not a concrete system, that we need to build everything out, especially in adulthood, with so much space and flexibility, and grace, that sometimes we're not going to fit it in exactly the way that we had imagined. And we need to set ourselves up for success, and that, like, leaving space for us to be human, leaving space for life to life. So just wanted to touch on that before we dive in. So when we're talking about these day-to-day acts of self-care, even the larger acts of self-care, I think the way to make space for it is to prioritize it. I think so often we are putting family, others, jobs, all of these other responsibilities that have to do with other people higher than the responsibilities and commitments that we are making to ourselves. I know I've been guilty of that in the past, and it takes work, it takes practice, but a great way to do that is by physically scheduling in your self care. And maybe it's, if you live by your calendar like me, or maybe it's post-it notes, whatever those reminders look like that will remind you to make these daily actions, reminders in your phone, however works for you. Schedule in your breaks, schedule in a meditation, schedule in your morning routine, even if you need to. And if you're starting a new habit, all of the reminders that you can give yourself will only help you.
I'm a huge proponent of crafting your schedule intentionally and having, the benefit of our smartphones and Google Calendars that can give us reminders, repeated reminders of when we should be or when we've decided or committed to implementing self-care throughout our routines. That's something that can help you take it off your plate as an item of anxiety, potentially, of trying to figure it out. Just taking the time to, like, hey, what day of the week do I typically have a free period of time that I could put self care in there? How much time for self care do you need? What kind of activities I think work best for you is important to look at first before defining your schedule, because some aspects of self-care can be as quick as making yourself that special cup of coffee just the way you like it, and that takes maybe just 10 minutes, and you can fit that in the beginning of your day, and so for the rest of your day you can go in feeling cared for.
Mm.
Other types of self-care, I know others really enjoy getting out in the sticks of nature, taking a super long, kind of physically intensive type of hike, and that's for them their self-care and that they need. That would take obviously like a half a day or a whole day maybe of preparation and time. So maybe that's something they can only fit in once a week or once a month.
Mm.
Understanding how much time it takes for your specific activity of self-care is really important so that you understand realistically what it looks like to incorporate that into your day-to-day life and your day-to-day schedule.
Mm.
And then also, I think it's important to take a step to check in of, for you personally, how often do you need self-care? Because that looks different for a lot of people. Some people need it every day, some people need it every hour.
Mm.
Others, which respectfully you have to understand, really only need it maybe once a month, once a quarter, once every 3 months, biannually, or once a year. Maybe it's that huge unplugging vacation that for them is their self-care. That's what they can afford, that's what they prefer, and that's what they can schedule
Mm.
into their day-to-day life, and understanding that it's not something maybe they need every single day, but it's something in the particular cadence of their life that they prefer could be
Mm.
good for their self-care.
I'm feeling a little resistance to the idea that self care happens twice a year. And I think that's just because that is not resonating with my definition of self care. So it's a good reminder that our definitions will change and the cadence will vary from person to person. But I do challenge you. If you're one of those people that thinks, "Oh, I take a trip once a year and that's all the self-care I need," I do question what your acts of self-care, if there are any, look like on a day-to-day basis, because I bet you're doing things that do classify as your self-care. You're like, no, 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 I need this every single week or every single day, or I don't feel 100% or I don't feel complete. Those are likely your acts of self-care. And if you're not doing those things and you're waiting till till this trip to take care of yourself, that is another area where I'd really like to challenge you to incorporate smaller acts of self-care every single day, because then you're getting to this point of completely depleting yourself, completely burning out, putting all the pressure on this trip to completely restore you to
Mm, mm,
100%, which again, I don't you're not setting yourself up for success in my mind. If you're able to achieve that, that's great. But then the other 11 months out of the year, let's say, you're really putting yourself on the back burner. And I think there's an opportunity to care for yourself and love yourself a little bit more. And I think that's actually a perfect segue into a little thought pattern I'd love to have you guys try on, which is when you're feeling depleted or burnt out, sometimes some weeks are just like that versus others. Not anything particular. You're just like, I am feeling wiped this week. I would love for that immediate next thought to be a question, which is, what can I do to take care of myself right now? When we are feeling depleted and tired, that is when we need to lean in the most into our self care. For me, a spa night is my immediate go to. And say you're feeling this at work, taking some time for yourself, taking a break, that work will still be there. It's going to look different, I think, when this is sort of occurring throughout your day. And so maybe it's identifying small things you could do. Let's say it's during the work week. During that day, taking a break, getting yourself that iced boba coffee or whatever you love. That's a little act of self care that I also do for myself. The little snack or getting yourself that nice lunch, right? And not having to be so tight on what your day to day looks like as your needs are changing. And then later on, what can I do when I have more time? Maybe it's in the evening, maybe it's in the weekend. For me, that's doing a face mask, completely vegging out and just letting myself rest, like physically pouring into myself, like nutrition, skincare, feeling the self-care seep into my skin. It genuinely feels so good and so restorative for me, and sleeping early and I wake up feeling like completely refreshed. What do you do, or what are some of the things that you do when you're feeling depleted or a little burnt out?
Thank you for sharing that, and I'm glad you extrapolated that when spa nights are really just face masks, things that we can afford, things that we can implement easily into our lives. For me, implementing self-care looks specifically like taking a nice walk in nature, getting some nature in. That really helps to restore me. In the context of the question of how do we make time for that, when I think of that, I'm not always able to do that. I can't just pop out of work and just go and do that and then come back. So what works for me is understanding that that's a once a weekend type of thing that I prefer to do. Being able to do that first thing Saturday morning. I like to wake up early on weekends as much as possible, mostly because I recognize that that's when I have the most free time, and while it's good for me to sleep in every once in a while, I feel the best, like I got the most out of my weekend by waking up early, which is maybe 6, 7, nothing super crazy, but just having that little extra time to kind of ease in through my day and be able to feel like I have enough time to fit in the self-care that I want to do, which is
Mm,
getting into nature, doing a little bit of exercise. That's what it looks like for me. Hopefully for you, you're able to reflect on when you have the most time.
mm,
And it's going to look different for everyone, whether you're juggling work and school or work and family, taking care of kids. it may feel it's always felt I've lived a extremely busy life pretty much my entire life, and I wouldn't have gotten through a lot of that if I wasn't able to find some small amount of time, some little act of self-care to insert through my day or my schedule regularly to get me through those things. And I encourage everyone, no matter your situation, to find something that's reasonable, realistic to implement in terms of self care in the context of your particular schedule. Because the deeper you look, you do end up having some amount of time that you can dedicate to something that can have a meaningful impact with regard to self care.
Mm.
And even if it's the least bit, everyone watches Netflix, everyone scrolls on their phone, and it's those moments that you can kind of think of when you say, "I don't really have time for
Mm.
self-care," where you really do. Um, trying to replace, "Hey, I love looking at cute dogs on social media just as much as the next person." I could spend hours doing that for sure, but I'd also recognize that those are moments maybe that I could better utilize with self-care
Mm.
rather than just unfortunately mindless consumption of
Mm.
social media. I think that's a good segue to this next thing that came up when I saw this question, which was kind of drawing this line between self-care and self-indulgence. The buzz and conversation around self-care, I think, has been around for a good handful of years, enough long enough to kind of see it be used in a lot of great ways. I'm glad that mental health is a lot more acceptable to discuss and talk about in our day to day lives in our society. And just with anything, you know, self care is simply a tool. And just as any tool can be misused, I think it's important to be aware and recognize when using self care as a vehicle to kind of shirk responsibility or to self
Mm.
indulge. Like, yes, it is important, absolutely, to incorporate regular activities that help restore you or build resiliency in you. Just, just with anything, use responsibly. You know, when we say, hey, take a walk or things like that, it doesn't mean skip out on your whole day. I think it's important to recognize that that's just a that's maybe an aspect of self-discipline that could be worked on, not so
Mm.
much self-care.
Mm.
And I think sometimes self-care in the context of a particular hobby,
Mm.
you know, spend responsibly. I think people
Mm.
can get very overzealous about finding a hobby or having a hobby that is undoubtedly 100% important to incorporate in your life as an aspect of self-care, but resist rampant consumerism, to spend, to overspend, which could then throw your entire life out of balance. Where it's easy to make the excuse or to self-indulge in the
Mm.
spending by
Mm.
saying, well, I want to self-care the best, so I gotta, get the best of the best for, whether it's a bike,
Mm.
if you're into biking or things like that, where it's
Mm.
really understanding that the self-care is the activity itself and what about that activity is what's truly giving you rest and restoration or resiliency, and what aspect of it is simply, being co-opted by keeping up with the Joneses. I think that's something that we can all work a little bit more on, but that's just something I wanted to mention because in the conversations about self-care, I believe in discussions about pretty much anything that,
Mm.
you know, we need to always keep a little bit of a rational eye on things
Mm.
because there's this idea of anything in excess can be a bad thing, vitamins, nutrients in excess, water. You drink too much water, you can accidentally, cause problems. So anything in excess, including self-care, can be something that you should be wary of. Any thoughts on that?
I was like grinning the whole time because two things. First off, the idea of being competitive about your self-care is just hilarious to me. I know we're all guilty of it at some point, I'm sure. And it's just so funny, right? How we can, well, I got to self-care the best, and so I'm going to buy the best things, and then what are we doing, right? What is the goal? At that point we've probably lost sight of what our goal is. And I kept thinking of, I'm not sure if you guys have seen the Parks and Rec episode about Treat Yourself Day. And it's kind of a perfect image of like more of that self-indulgence sort of disguised as self-care of like, well, it's treat yourself day. We're going to take care of ourselves today. So we're going to buy designer bags. We're going to go to the spa. We're going to get limos. We're going to be extravagant because it makes us feel good. And that is no knock to whatever your self-care looks like and doing what makes you feel good. But of course, as Tate was saying, everything in moderation. And I think that's a great reminder to kind of zoom out, take a step back, and make sure that we're always checking in with ourselves. Because as we grow and change, so should our routines. And part of that check in, I think, should be reflecting on our self care patterns. And that could actually help identify, hey, am I cyclically burning out? What's causing that? Could I up my self-care routine, or should is there anything about it that I could change so that I'm not cyclically burning out? That's not healthy. I don't want that for myself. Is this a pattern, and am I a habitual offender? Or are there things within my circumstances within my life that maybe need to change? Maybe that in itself is caring for yourself. Or is it a one time thing that I can really learn a lot from and it's unlikely to repeat itself? Okay, maybe those one time big hits require more of those grand gesture types of self care of like, hey, maybe I need to just schedule a staycation for myself because I need to unplug, I need a change of environment, and I just need like sort of a drastic re up right now. I think those are great questions and sort of check-in moments to have with yourself so that you make sure that you're constantly doing what's best for you where you're at and you're adjusting to meet yourself where you're at. And also that we're constantly kind of checking in to evaluate big picture circumstances, environments, friendships to make sure that we are making choices consciously that serve us and our overall well-being. Thanks for tuning in with us. That was, I felt a very holistic, well rounded conversation around self care, maybe more than you were even hoping for. But those are sort of all the things that I think come up for us in our lives and have come up for us. And we would love to hear from you all what self care looks like for you. If there's anything that came up for you during our discussion, we'd love to engage with you guys. Till next time, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye. Visit the links in our bio to submit your questions on how to life
Or book a coaching session with us.